Take it from that spot, please.
Good morning, Matthew. 6:10 a.m. Let's put everything aside for a second. Even real estate. I want to do something really different this morning and lay down that vision that I had for the perfect new era evening news report, right? And it was centered on the motion graphic open, that sequence that we normally see lasting about 30 seconds, a little more these days. You know, now you see that manifest in the CBS morning news eye opener that really did revolutionize it, and that carried over into the CBS evening news, that headliner portion of the newscast. So that's how they did the motion graphic opener. Well, not the motion graphic opener, but the teaser sequence, which is then followed by the motion graphic open. And my vision for the newscast was to see this model that was pioneered, Cronkite era, really perfected in the Rather era, to use CBS as the example. And I think has actually, despite the fact that interest in news has dropped off, for cultural reasons and the lack of an attention span, and also out of the attempt to cater to that lack of attention span, we saw in the past 5 years the emergence of CBS morning news with their eye-opener. Really great way to do things. Very different. You know, pulling local news together, other national newscasts, other networks, and showing it, and splicing it together in a nearly as postmodern masterpiece style as what the Ursuan newscast would be. But here's the thing, is the reason, and my interest in storytelling and Claude Lévi-Strauss's structural study of myth, and how that always fascinated me, in part because what people forget about Claude Lévi-Strauss's The Structural Study of Myth is that the entire basis of that piece of that paper, all of those ideas in that paper, the basis of it was to be able to take the most powerful computer at the time, which, by the way, any desktop computer today could do in excess, exponentially greater power. But to take the IBM punch card computer, the Holocene thing, and use that computer and its inherent symbolic logic capacities, right? That a lot of symbolic logic, the 19 rules of Irving's 19 rules, the rules of inference, modus ponens, modus tollens, the affirming, the denying, all of that, the basic symbols, the negation, the conjunction, all of it, right? If and, all of that. If functions, basically. To borrow from an Excel spreadsheet. All of that, it was to take Claude Lévi-Strauss's wonderful theories were centered on how do we have a computer tell us what these stories mean, and compare these logical patterns, these plot lines in classic mythology, right? Now, why is this important? Because what my vision for news involved postmodernism. It involved an incredibly big perspective on all human events. Yes, it's just a template that anyone can deploy if they buy it or whatever, and employ at their local news station or national news station. But there were varying ways it could be deployed to account for how to get the best possible result for epicness, as I say, based on limitations of studio size. Well, you know what? Fuck the studio then. You don't have a studio that can look like a space age thing, or you can use all the these new lighting tactics to make it so dramatic or whatever. You don't have that. No, invest in the camera equipment. do the most important thing about the program, which is to hire freelance artists using the highest quality cameras that go around and chase these news events to have multiple perspectives and cinematography types on these events. And this is going to become especially important for the motion graphic opening. It's going to be, the opening sequence, the teaser sequence, which is unlike any other newscast's teaser sequence. It's what makes the Ursua newscast, because it is a postmodern cavalcade of universal salvation. This newscast is a healing force in your life. It is the newscast is a religious ceremony that uses current events, the events that happen in day-to-day life, the same things that would be covered by any other newscast, that takes them, covers them in a way more epic than anyone could ever expect each and every day. Everything down to a car accident, the news gathering done faster, done better, done more epically, in a more moving human way than you could see any of the other stations turn around. Because in the hiring process, from the reporters to the executive producers, what we look for is storytellers, people that understand mythology. We look for PhD level myth weavers. And let's jump into, the reason why Claude Lévi-Strauss's theories are so important, and others, is because as I start to simulate in my head what this teaser sequence would look like, and how it would be integrated into the whole of this newscast, which posits itself not merely as, here's the news, but I'm going to heal you today. I'm going to give you hope for the human race today. This news anchor, whoever it is deploying the Mathew Ursua platform, the package, is actually a Native American medicine man, is actually a Hawaiian kahuna, is actually among the poets of the Celts and the early Anglo-Saxon poets of their oral tradition, Beowulf, understanding each and everything around us, from the small things to the big things, to the things large in scope to the things small in scope, as more than just something that happened, as something that happened for a reason. If you don't believe it, if you lack faith in that, all you have to do is sit down and watch one Mathew F. Ursua type 30-minute evening newscast, and you'll be treated to a religious ceremony. You'll be treated to essentially a church service celebrating the best and the worst of humanity, celebrating the fact that it really is all just a story, and inherent in the Mathew Ursua newscast is, it's planted in there, this idea that we all die, that in the end, no matter who the thug criminals in the streets were, no matter who the hero cops were, no matter who you thought the hero or the villain was, in the end, everyone will be unmasked. We will all remove our Greek tragedy masks, and no matter what color those masks wore, and hold hands on this stage. And inherent in the Mathew Ursua newscast is this idea. And because the newscast looks at the world from this godlike perspective of universal salvation and forgiveness, it becomes inherently a healing force that raises the perspective of the viewer, moves the viewer to tears on a nightly basis, gives him hope that his era, without the assistance of the Mathew Ursua newscast and its great cinematography and its reporting that is each and every night a epic poem, each and every night it is Beowulf, it is a recordation of, it's like you're watching human history unfold and it's already been written in the way a historian would look at it in 100 years, like Barbara W. Tuchman did with many of her books, such as March of Folly, the way she took Roman Empire, the fall of these great institutions and countries, and posited over that and overlaid what was happening to America, what had happened to America in the Vietnam War era, and it wasn't long past, but this historian had the ability to look at it like that, and she did, and it was incredibly effective, incredibly big-hearted. So this, anyway, let's jump into it. So this news headliner sequence in the Mathew Ursua type newscast would be a postmodern cavalcade of imagery that initiates the viewer of the newscast. It is a initiation. It is a rite of passage into the healing ceremony that is the newscast. And that's why when someone watches it, unlike every other newscast, they get to participate in something very primal. And in today's lack of rites of passage, where we don't get that anymore, it often because we watch news and read newspapers that are purely informational and are total shit. Well, all of a sudden you're tuning into this thing and you have something completely unexpected. You're going to be initiated and you're going to be chosen tonight. Even if you are tuning in for the first time, this is like whoever's anchoring the program, whatever the subject matter of the day is, what you're watching isn't just who, what, where, when, why, how, in the traditional sense. We're going to answer those questions in a way that heal your suffering, in a way that elevate your perspective about humanity, that give you hope in your fellow man. And in a world where, because of programs like this, you lack rites of passage, rites at all, R-I-T-E-S, the magic is missing, right? From the ceremonies that would cleanse battlefields. A long time, it was a weird thing. It's like war was under, they are affirmative mythologies. The early mythologies are affirmative mythologies. They do not seek to change the quarrelsome or bellicose nature of the human being. For instance, in Hawaiian mythology, you have Ku, the god of war, right? And Joseph Campbell made a reference to many of the primitive religions, their worldviews, as evidenced in their sacred texts, the ones often recorded by people interested in preserving what was once an oral tradition. Made reference to these being affirmative mythologies. No, we're just going to celebrate everything from the death to the suffering to the pain to life lost and the good too. We're not going to try to make a moral judgment about what we see. We're going to say this is all venerated, celebrated, approved by, and supported by a deity or multiple deities. Right, so that takes me back to someone tunes into this newscast and you are now being given a rite of passage, an initiation, an invitation to have that same heart, that each and every, and before a reporter goes out, and this is what's makes it special, is the reporters know what they're doing. Before work, before they sit at their desk in the newsroom, and by the way, this is a very different kind of group of people. They're storytellers, so they by nature would have a very different approach, and they'd probably be lighting incense or whatever, because that's just the culture of it. They'd probably be having crying spells over manual typewriters as they bang out their copy for the night, because that's what bleeding heart writers do. But they're at the start of watch, we'd bring in a Native American medicine man each and every day, or a Hawaiian kahuna, an expert, or someone, or Michael Bernard Beckwith, if he's in town, wherever this is happening, he's brought in, and he gives a rite of passage to the storyteller. And each and every day, these really high profile high quality motivational speakers, lovers of humanity, come in and initiate the reporters and send them off on their very sacred role in this Mathew Ursua news system as healers of modern society. But in any event, so as I start to simulate because what's integral to the Mathew Ursua newscast is that teaser sequence that you see. It would be much longer in a Mathew Ursua newscast. Might be even 2 minutes, but you have epic music, and the computers would have to help. But basically, it would be a really epic presentation. It'd be like, in and of itself, an almost self-contained cinema like movie quality production that always ends before the reporter comes on and starts to share the stories, which are in themselves very masterful productions. The stories themselves, the packages, are the work of a healer getting into a situation and sharing a story and using the objectivity of journalism, everything about journalism, and the platform that the journalistic role offers through which to share a story as an objective, uses all of that, right? In a way elevated beyond measure compared to what any other platform offers. What any News 5, News 8, all that garbage. So let's just jump right into some of these simulations. And here's where it gets kind of difficult, because it would require a computer to help. Because the fundamental assumption for this movie, one of the fundamental assumptions for this, 60-second to 90-second to 2-minute long movie, encapsulating how important everything that happened today that we're covering on this newscast is, not only for you and your family and for the near future, but because God was watching and God ordained each and every one of these events, the tragedies, the triumphs, and was pleased by what he saw because of you, Mr. Rogers, right? He talked about look for the helpers, and these things are trumped up, and that's why we send out photographers and videographers with red cinema cameras, 8K, specifically for this opening sequence, whether it's a fire, whether to look for archetypes of heroism, specifically for heroic archetypes in everything around, right? And this is where it gets weird, because, by the way, it doesn't matter. This is one of the assumptions for this movie that starts out the newscast, is that it doesn't matter where you find these heroic archetypes in imagery or in story. Whether it's a firefighter silhouette walking out of a burning building, you see that he's carrying a baby from the side. You just find them somewhere, because we utilize postmodernism and we splice these images in with the other stories, right? Because it is just find the heroism, just find the helpers, just find the people, the agents of God that are, regardless of what role they're serving, somehow, at every level, but at the highest level in each and every instance. No matter how small it would seem, if that image looks heroic, if the photographer does it, then it is a heroic archetype. And whether that's a firefighter carrying a baby out of a burning building, or whether that's, Child Protective Services doing something small and deeply moving for a child in need as they take her away from her parents, or whether it's Erica Lynn Towner graduating from drug court, and that picture is just so much more beautiful than any other picture that the photography's just done so wonderfully. This is a heroic archetype, and it's spliced in with all the other archetypes of heroism, right? So this is my vision for news. I was thinking, so as I tried to apply this to, well, let's do it this way. What if Brian Wilson died, right? What if Brian Wilson died? That would be big news. Why? Because that song, God Only Knows, among other songs by the Beach Boys, are cultural icons. They unite generations, and, you know, God only knows what I'd be without you. So, it would probably lead the newscast. We could choose that as the central theme. The death of Brian Wilson, or rather the life of Brian Wilson. The central theme of the 90-second to 2-minute long, to 2.5-minute long even, movie. That is the opening sequence that leads in, and the motion graphic opening sequence is part of the whole thing. That's what's weird, is the motion graphic opening sequence changes each and every day. There's a level of branding to it, yes, but it changes every day, and so to meld to the story that we as the reporters, God's chosen healers for a world in turmoil, are sharing each and every news. So because we see our newscast as so important and understand it as a healing technology, this motion graphic opening sequence changes, and the music changes, and the music can be part of, for instance, if Brian Wilson dies, of course, God Only Knows would be the song that all of the news is laid out to in this Mathew Ursua newscast opening sequence with the teasers, you see. Yeah, I got work I gotta do today. Like, I got leads I gotta respond to, which is good. But I want to rest. So, God only knows, right? And there be tragedy and horror and fires and people dying in car accidents and pictures taken of the dead bodies on the road from the motorcycle accident, and people crying around it because a family member saw their brother, you know, brains all over the road on the 160, like I had to see that day one time. And all that tragedy is there. And it's always a universal salvation-based storyline. So, you know, you'd have this 2-minute long, say, opening sequence of the movie that ordains the events that we're covering as chosen events, as reflections of ourselves. You know, put each and every viewer healed by this, put at the center of his or her own universe, and elevate in importance. So God only knows on a day like that. So we'd have to have like exclusive rights to air. And also, like, for instance, when you have a police incident, and when the newscast ends up being police based, because most of the, or, you know, fireman based or paramedic based, because most of the heroic archetypes we got from the day really were from policemen, you know, shooting people that are about to kill someone or rescuing a child, and these heroic images. We have all these heroic images of those archetypes, the heroic archetype of the hero. And maybe there's no big thing like Brian Wilson dying, where you can say, we have God Only Knows start out the news. That tracking session can be the soundtrack to the day's events. It starts out with that horn, right? And then it references how in a period of 9 minutes and so many seconds, that epic, historic song was tracked. And you know, as we talk about the car accidents, as we talk about the national news, the president, it's overlaid in a way that makes sense from the plot perspective over God Only Knows. And we lead with the death of Brian Wilson, and we also end with it before, as the motion graphic sequence begins and the anchor comes on to start sharing the news, right? But it's done so beautifully and masterfully. So this movie, this headline teaser, ends also with a reference to Brian Wilson, and it is always used as an element to tie together the events of the day, the stories of the day, in that sequence, the things we're going to talk about in the newscast, to tie them together in a meaningful way. So, for instance, what does Brian Wilson symbolize? Beach Boys, that music, his entire story. When the Beach Boys grew up, from as beautiful as Stay True to Your School was, that sound, the harmonies of the Beach Boys, the high school boys thinking about California girls along, and you just these thoughts of Pacific Coast Highway, to songs like God Only Knows, and those lush harmonies that are angelic, that elevate us into feeling like we're in love, right? And that's interesting is sometimes when you look at the stories you have and you start to produce this, you're going to have just something that's so perfect. For say there's a story about autism or something, and there's this kid that's drawing pictures, right? So let's take random events. How can we tie them together in a deeply moving way for this movie? Let's take autism, death of Brian Wilson, lots of police incidents. Okay, lots of police incidents. Domestic violence. Let's take that. So, and the thing with autism, there's this kid that's drawing, this fat, retarded-looking kid that's some kind of a genius in school, like 8th grade or something, and he's drawing, or no, he's in high school, and he's drawing pictures of, things from everyday life, from life. And he's drawing things like brides getting married kind of thing. He's drawing pictures of brides getting married. And he's drawing pictures of these things that are reflective of, the life he can't have in a way. But that's really not what it's about. So he's being honored. The story is that he's being honored for these sketches he does, and he's a really good artist. He's autistic or something, and part of the story is his social struggles, and how because the journalist is so brilliant, because we hire only the best storytellers, he finds a way to make a parallel to Vincent van Gogh with his mental struggles, right? So the reporter that covered the story makes a parallel to Vincent van Gogh, and somehow the song Starry Starry Night ends up in it, and all that stuff. And in that story, the picture he draws of a veiled bride is very sad, because it's symbolic of the fact that people with that social awkwardness condition have trouble with their sex lives, and they will probably never marry in a lot of cases, and that's just something that often is off the table for them. So there's a level of inherent sadness in that. Okay, well, so we can have God Only Knows in this instance, death of Brian Wilson, and these sketches that we've scanned in high resolution throughout the course of this opening movie. And these sketches we take, and they have something to do with the story that we're teasing. You see, so they're all intertwined together. This is postmodern. They're intertwined together. That's the Mathew Ursua newscast. But I wanted to bring something else up too. So let's say we eliminate death of Brian Wilson. There's no, Amy Winehouse has died, so you buy exclusive rights to use her song, Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow, and make the opening sequence and have a thread throughout the newscast of the futility of celebrity, to have this thread throughout the newscast of we may not love Amy Winehouse tomorrow, essentially, whatever tomorrow is, because things fade so fast, and just have these little veiled references to that's why you need to just love your kids, all that stuff. And not all that stuff, I really do believe in those things, and this newscast is a healing force, right? We are ordained healers as reporters in the Mathew Ursua news system. But for instance, we would have exclusive rights to all of Kanye's music, and we would retrack all of the lights if it were a police-based incident day. The orchestral, kind of like Portland Cello Project did. And it would show all these heroic images of policemen. And then it'd be Kanye West, All the Lights, you know, and all the other news would be spliced in too. But the way, so if God Only Knows were deleted because Brian Wilson died, the end of the movie would be this, you know, I long for the date for the late 60s. Some other story where you get someone just saying a clip. It may have nothing to do with Brian Wilson. I long for the 60s. In that era, there was no, right? So we as reporters and genius storytellers find a way to splice it together that way to make the newscast. But it may have to be computer aided because it is so complex. We have to find a way to meld them all together, to take all of these elements and make sure that there is enough of a common storyline for this postmodern approach not to in any way devalue, right, the experience of each and every individual story. So that's where we are with that.